Mercury retrograde in Pisces, take two, because there was a retrograde, all sorts of technical ish. Actually, you know what? I don't think there was. I think I just thought there was. And why am I saying that anyway? That was then. This is now. Greetings, salutations from space. How in the heavens are you, friends? Today is Monday, the day of the moon, February 23rd, 2026. If you are into that whole Gregorian trip, and I'm glad you are here with me to journey through space and time for a bit. Hilariously, in take one, in the first attempt of this transmission, I was speaking about the superstition regarding Mercury retrograde and how we shouldn't do anything. Lock it down, they say. Certainly don't try to communicate, how this would likely be particularly true with Mercury in the sign of Pisces, and we'll tune into that a bit. And now the moon is void of course, and we're in the midst of eclipse season, so just shut it down, do nothing. Well, while there might be some resonance to these superstitions, we want to make sure that we're not utilizing astrology as some way out, but rather as a way in. That's always my intention. And for me, a lot of healing will be found when we reconnect our astrology to the living sky. As I'm fond of saying, astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. So when we re-nature our astrology by reconnecting to the mysteries of the living sky, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the astrological equations we use. That's the game, right? That's how we can, I feel, get aligned with the heavenly happenings and play along rather than get played. That is always my wish, and it's something that folks will often hear me saying at Mercury retrograde time. Don't get played by Mercury retrograde by playing along. Well, my partner and I were just reflecting back on the last time Mercury was retrograde in the sign of Pisces. And that was in February and March of 2020. Now, of course, when we look back to that time, when the world was confused and crazy and really feeling the interconnectedness of all beings and things, and there was the fear of this great virus, and there was a lot of pain around loss and the like, separations and lockdowns. Like, looking back then, there's a lot for us to heal, right? But first, I'm just going to share a personal tale. So Anna and I put an offer in on a house during Mercury retrograde, during a Mercury transit, which is when we can actually visibly see with technology, with telescopes, Mercury transiting in front of the sun disk. That can only happen in the signs of Taurus or in Scorpio, as it was at that time. It was November 11th, 2019. So we found a house, we wanted to go for it. Mercury was retrograde. Should we wait? No, we can't. Let's at least wait for that moment of the Cazimi, as we call it, when the Mercury is in the heart of the sun. And we told the realtor, or asked the realtor, please wake up at 5 something in the morning and hit go right then. And then that day also, I went early and stayed late, but then Anna and Koa came, her son, and we went to the Griffin. No, that's in LA. We went to the observatory here in the hills of Oakland. Oh, words, huh? The Chabot Observatory, and lined up and looked through the scopes and watched Mercury in front of the sun disk. Oh, it would have been, 4 going on 4.5 years old at the time. And he was like, that little dot, like, so what? And I was like, I hear you, buddy. But for me, that was a huge deal. And one thing that was happening then is we were asking Mercury for blessings on this great effort for our family, right? So anyway, we got the house. And I will say there was some pretty typical retrograde happenings when we did. Like, we ordered a fridge and it was like a month delayed. So I was working with this tiny little refrigerator. It was one of the things I can remember. There was an electrical thing. There was a bunch of things that we had to sort out, like technically, and Mercury cars, right? It's the only time we ever experienced crime in that place, but it was in like the first days of us living there. We went out and on his car. When we got back, I saw like a flashlight in our driveway underneath my car at a Prius then, and somebody had stolen my catalytic converter, right? And we wondered, well, maybe some of this is the result of putting in our offer during Mercury retrograde, right? So I also saw this as an opportunity to graduate from that Prius, which I had had for years, and I started looking at cars. And then when I found one I thought I had liked, I wasn't sure, and I knew Mercury was just about to station retrograde in Pisces, right? So this was the retrograde after that November 2019 retrograde where we put an offer in on our house. And here we are some months later, and I'm ready to get a car. And I was like, you know what? I'm not really in a rush. Like, we had an honest car. And why don't I just wait until Mercury stations direct? And then, and I'm not saying we should, but the traditional astrology has some issue with Mercury in Pisces, and we'll speak to that a bit here today too. Stacy, I feel you. I see you. And of course, I'm not saying Mercury in Pisces is bad, so we're going to get back to that. All right. But I was like, well, maybe I should just wait for Mercury to move into Aries. So that was this delay that I wouldn't have signed up for in any way if I wasn't an astrologer. And I felt a little foolish about it because I'm always telling people don't get played by Mercury retrograde by playing along, and I will continue to sing that song. And it felt like, well, I'm just like succumbing to this superstitious astrology that I'd rather not be a part of. However, what happened when we put in our offer with Mercury retrograde, and there were these things, including the catalytic converter of my car being stolen on the driveway. And I was like, I'm just going to wait. I'm not in a rush. Well, what happened, right? Before Mercury got into Aries, the whole world, especially here in California, got locked down. Like, we couldn't go anywhere, or we weren't supposed to. So why should I buy a car anyway? And I ended up not buying a car until September, which, by the way, I made a very bad decision on a particular van. And I'm not going to say that was the result of this thing. I have issues. It's a retrograde. But anyway, just as a case of at one point in our lives, we chose to kind of follow the suggestions that this craft offers and to wait a bit. And it turns out that we were really happy that we did. So why were we speaking about this the other day? Well, we have recently, well, a year ago, almost sold that house, and we're in between. We're hoping to get another place. We're paying rent at a cool place in Berkeley, but it's not our forever thing. Financially, it certainly can't be. And so we're looking around, and we saw a place we kind of liked, but the foundation was questionable, right? When you never want to go there, especially in earthquake land, right? But it's real nice, and we're in that place. I'm like, hey, remember 6 years ago when Mercury was last retrograde in Pisces and that whole thing about the car? And I decided to wait, and it felt kind of, I don't know, foolish in some regards, but then it turned out not to be. Maybe we should just let it go that way. Because eclipse season as well, and other things, where electional astrology or the astrology of choosing times just suggests we wait a bit, right? But that doesn't mean we should do nothing. On and I actually, interestingly, we went to Chabot Space Center here in Oakland, whose name I could not remember earlier, to see this Alan Watts 360 movie recently. And I really appreciated much of what was said by Alan Watts, as I always do. And the lecture that they were utilizing was one about meditation, and how this should not be us trying to hear nothing, see nothing, like completely shut it down. That the whole point is to remember that we are all that ever was, is, and will be. So this has to be an inclusive thing, not an exclusive thing. And since we are already everything, there's nothing to do. And then he says this really wonderful line, but people confuse the truth with there's nothing to do with the idea that we should try as hard as we can to do nothing. That came alive for me recently as well. And if you're on my mailing list, GeminiBrett.com. If you're not, you would have heard me write about this recently. But I was really interested in seeing some responses to a post in the social media realms recently, when I sent just an image of Saturn conjoining Neptune. That would have looked a little something like this, but not here, because the alignment wasn't in 2027, but rather 2026. On February 20th, Saturn and Neptune finally made their conjunction, right? Those happen about every 36 to 37 years, right? And it's a big deal. And of course, this isn't from the sun's point of view. The sun's not seeing Saturn conjunct Neptune. We're on Earth. Geocentrically, Earth-centered, we see Saturn and Neptune aligned here, right? Let me go check in where you are and just ask, did you see that on your screen? That solar system model. So anyway, I shared an image of that Saturn-Neptune conjunction thanks to Solar System Scope, which we were just looking at. And I wrote, Saturn and Neptune have aligned. How can we align? What does this mean for you, for me, and for everything? Question mark. It was really interesting to see a few different responses of people saying, well, we can't know. We have to wait and see. And by the way, responses from people who I never experienced saying that kind of thing about any other astrological alignment. So I was like, wow, what is this? And on one level, I believe Saturn would really appreciate the prudence and the patience of wait and see. And Neptune maybe would appreciate the ambiguity of that whole thing. And I'm not saying, by the way, that I don't agree. But that Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. Aries isn't going to wait, my friends. Like, Aries is going to go for it and commit and be that spark, right? So there is this question of, well, what can we do about it? Because as Alan Watts said, since you are already everything, there's nothing to do. Don't confuse that with the idea that you must do nothing, right? And again, this brings us back to some of the superstitious astrology that would say, do nothing at Mercury retrograde time. Now, I don't want to be a hypocrite. I was just on with a client earlier, and we were talking about her launching her YouTube page to talk about astrology. And we're looking at dates. And I said, you know, you might want to wait until after eclipse season, until Mercury stations direct, and maybe even waiting for Mercury to get into Aries. And a lot of this was based upon her own chart, right? So I don't want to these rules that we use. Again, for me, astrology is the poetic breath of nature. So when we renature astrology by realigning to the living sky, we will remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of something in this journey that says, yeah, when Mercury's close by, things get a little bit wonky and then by. So when we look to the aid, it means that that planet 20th, because closest to the sun, pass Earth by. And my friends, that is genius pi times a year. 22 of these cycles in 7 Earth years. And of course, 22 sevenths is one of our old approximations for the transcendental pi, that great number that connects the immeasurable curve with the measurable line. Transcendental, such a wonderful word. For Pisces, the seas through which Mercury is about to backstroke in this retrograde dance, right? So it's cool to see here on February 25th, 2026, which is the day that Mercury stations retrograde. Why? Because Mercury is passing Earth by. It's cool to see Mercury at Venus's side when that's happening. And the question is, can they be seen, or are they too close to the light? Maybe we can speak about that a bit. Cool to see that Saturn and Neptune are so strongly configured when that's happening, because we want to look at the whole chart, wheels within wheels within wheels. But the thing I want to share kind of most importantly here again is that what Mercury retrograde means is that Mercury is passing Earth and therefore closest to us. I'm looking at March 7th, 2026, which is the date of the Mercury Cazimi, meaning Mercury in the heart of it, Mercury in the heart of the sun. Now, unlike that November 11th, 2019 Mercury Cazimi I was describing before, this is not a Mercury transit, meaning Mercury from Earth's point of view will not be seen visibly moving in front of the sun. This is not to scale. And I can just see, thanks to solar system scope, this wonderful heliocentric model that we're playing with here, that Mercury is like north of the Earth-Sun line at that point. So Mercury, from our point of view, will actually be going like over the sun. We won't see Mercury transit, but still Mercury aligning between us. And for me, the way to play along with Mercury retrograde so we don't get played is like I was taught with Santa Claus. When he comes close by, bring a wish and bring an offering. So in my house, it was, carrots for the reindeer, who I never noticed had human-shaped teeth because they would take a bite and leave the rest on the plate. And Santa would take a bite of the cookie and leave the rest too. I did wonder why he didn't just eat the whole thing. But, a lot of houses, a lot of cookies, right? But anyway, this is how I like to play along with Mercury retrograde, right? Mercury retrograde means Mercury's close to Earth. So let's bring an offering and have that offering connected to a wish, right? So with Mercury's last retrograde, and I think I'm going to continue this one, I brought a wish of help me open my ear and my voice. And I committed to 33 days of 33 minutes of musical practice every day. And I chose to keep that one going for the entire Mercury cycle, which is about 4 months long, the Mercury Sun cycle in Earth sky, because there are 3 of them a year, although there are really pi of them a year. And in those 4-month long cycles, about 116 days on average, 3 weeks of retrograde, right? Well, let me say before I move forward that if you would like to play along with this Mercury retrograde in community, Scorpiana, my beloved, and I would love to invite you to our Mercury retrograde challenge. Just drawing it up so you can see the place to go. And then I'll put this on your screen. So if you type in GeminiBrett.com/retrograde into your magic machine, you will find your way to this page where you can read what the Mercury Retrograde Challenge is all about. We're launching this ship and sending notice pretty late in the game because we're going to have our first gathering tomorrow, Tuesday, February 24th at 10:30 a.m. And we have a 4-week version of this thing, this Mercury Retrograde Challenge. And there's an 8-week version. And Anna's also offering a whole nother opportunity that will allow also for individual astro coaching with her along the way. So please head over to geminibrett.com/retrograde. Let me put that link in the chat. If you want to learn more and sign up today, again, it's going to be 4 or 8 Tuesdays, depending, beginning tomorrow, Tuesday, February 24th, 10:30 a.m. Pacific time. Of course, everything will be recorded. I'll be offering some astrological deep dives, mythology, mystery, much, much more. But most importantly, it's an opportunity for us to align in community and support one another as we move through these times where we align our wish with some kind of offering. So sometimes that's sacrifice, right? Like, so sometimes it will be a commitment. I will do this every day. Usually I give myself 3 cheat days, so it's not as hard and I'm not so harsh on myself. Or some kind of fast, right? I give you this. I give you sugar. I give you this one with Pisces. I'm intent on opening more to my dream world. I've had a bad habit of having my phone nearby when I sleep, maybe listening to a podcast. I went to sleep last night to something terrible. So let's stop that. Right? So for these 3 weeks of retrograde, the phone's not even going to be in the same room. When I'm sleeping, I will trust that I wake up on time without that alarm, or I can find another one. And I will open up the opportunity for more dream space, right? Mercury's retrograde in Pisces for me, because I was born with Gemini rising, is up at the top of my chart in the 10th. And so there's things that I'm offering right now very much aligned with this opportunity, like sacred geometry for astrologers. I can say more about that later. And so I'm also going to give a sacred geometry practice every day to be at my launch pad. It's been a long time for me since I was there drawing the circles and the seed of life and the 12-spoked wheel of the zodiac and many things that I'm going to be sharing, these great sacred rites that open the portals of mystery with many, many students at Nadia Shah's Synchronicity University. Well, let me just share this now. I'm speaking so much about it. On Saturday, March 7th, right, which we just found our way to in the solar system scope heliocentric model space, right, on Saturday, March 7th, when Mercury's aligning between Earth and the Sun. I'm going to have the first of 5 classes at Synchronicity University. This wonderful work, Sacred Geometry for Astrologers. So you can see the link right at the bottom there, geminibrett.com/sacred. You don't have to choose retrograde challenge or this. You could certainly do both. This one, in fact, if you sign up before February 28th here in a few days, you can choose your own price as little as $25 for this 5-week course that will launch on March 7th. Now, I elected Mercury Kazemi for that, also part of the teachings 3-7, where we're going to be into the sacred geometry, but also the number magic. I'll be showing how 7 comes from 3. What? Well, join me and you will find out. And we will be doing lots of other kind of Piscean mind stuff, where we're releasing some of what we thought we know about the math magics, which is only quantity. 1 + 1 is 2. Well, how can you add 1 to anything if oneness is everything? And we'll look at some questions like that, and more importantly than just on symbols on a page, you know, the sacred shapes. Look at how 1 becomes 2-ness and the like. Light paint. I love hearing that you signed up yesterday and that you're looking forward to picking up your compass again. So am I, and really reflecting on how when a lot of these findings came in for me at the launch pad, it was like 12 years ago, and I was dealing with shoulder stuff then as I am now. Well, the fun thing about launching this on March 7th, Mercury Cazimi, is that the next week will be 3/14. So oftentimes we say Pi Day, right? And it will end on 4/4. So I'll be speaking about number magic along the way, but really tuning into the sacred shapes. Like, why do we call it the circle of spirit and the crescent of soul? What does that mean? Or the cross of matter, and much more. I love hearing that we did some circles today. Yeah, so one of the things I'll actually be offering to friends who are in our Mercury Retrograde Challenge, and also in the Sacred Geometry course, and I know actually several of you are, is maybe you want to join me and commit to the launch pad, doing some sacred geometry every day. If so, since the Mercury Retrograde Challenge will be meeting tomorrow first, I'll give you your first assignment so you can start when Mercury stations retrograde on Mercury's Day, on Wednesday, February 25th, 2026. Casey, I love that you shared this. Thank you so much. The last round of the Mercury Retrograde Challenge was really inspiring, that you're really looking forward to this one. I just saw that you signed up today, and it brought a big smile to my face. Yeah, the Mercury Retrograde Challenge is a great opportunity for us to come together with fellow star students and really share heart and intentions and support one another along the way. So last time, a lot of people chose to partner up with somebody who was moving through something similar to they were, and feeling that community support and that fellowship is so necessary. You know, Pisces is here to remind us that there is only one thing that ever was, is, and will be. You are that, and so am I, right? We are one, but that doesn't mean we're not also one ray or one individual being, and that we shouldn't reach out and connect in community. And I think we're going to find that this is a particularly tender Mercury retrograde. Mercury, one of the many astronomy or astrology kind of deep dives that you'll access by signing up for the Mercury Retrograde Challenge, is me showing and how the Mercury elemental years work, to use the term that Gary Caton honored in his first Mercury book. I learned about them at the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School with Daniel Jamario then. Mercury typically is either retrograde in the same element, same signs of the same element, for 4 or 6 cycles before moving meta retrograde through the elements. So in other words, as we in astrology, it's a very weird elemental order, tend to learn fire, right? Like Aries, and then Taurus like earth like Taurus, and air like Gemini, and water like Cancer, and then back to fire, earth, air, water, fire, earth, air, water, right? Where Mercury does his retrogrades, he moves through the elements in the other direction. So if I rewind time, we'll find that Mercury's last trip between Earth and the Sun, which was November 20th, 2025, was in Scorpio, so water, right? But before then, we were in a fire period. So here's one in Leo in July of 2025, and March in Aries, right? Back in Sagittarius, in December of 2024, right? So fire time, and then coming since then into these water times. And here we are with Mercury's retrograde in Pisces. So I'm looking at the Cazimi on March 7th, 2026. It's at 3:01 a.m. But the Hellenistic condition for Cazimi was a planet within a degree of the sun. And so if we rewind the day before, here we see 2 degrees on March 6th, but Mercury's moving most quickly retrograde when close to the sun. So let me just show you that Mercury pulls within 1 degree that day here, March 6th, Friday at 3 p.m. Pacific time. So it looks like 12 hours in this case between this Hellenistic consideration of Cazimi within 1 degree of the light to the actual Mercury-Sun conjunction. I mean, kind of exactly at 3:01 a.m. And then let's look 12 hours later. And yeah, Mercury now 1 degree on the other side. Now, by the way, it doesn't always work like that, that Mercury would have exactly 24 hours being within 1 degree of the sun. I'm like astonished to see that, but I should know better because Mercury astonishes me again and again and again and again and again. Why does it not always work like that? Well, you can actually see it pretty well over here in solar system scope, where they're showing us the elliptical nature of a planet's orbit rather than circular, right? Circles with one center, orbits are elliptical with 2 foci. The way that they're doing that here in solar system scope is having, as you can see, the center of Mercury's orbital, they show a circle, not be the center of the sun. But this helps you see that there are places in Mercury's path that are close to the sun, or how do we call it? Perihelios, and far from the sun. I mean, interestingly, for Mercury, they're like in Sagittarius and Gemini, at least from Earth's point of view. That's like where the close and far points from the sun are. So Pisces, where Mercury is passing between Earth and sun right now, it's kind of like an average distance of Mercury. And I'm enough of a nerd that I need to go check that out. All right, so here's our Cazimi date on March 7th, 2026, 3:01:44 a.m. Pacific time. And Astro Gold astrology software will let me go and see in Mercury's distance from the Earth at that time. I can compare it to Mercury's average distance. Can't I? Well, it looks like I can look at the average distance from the sun. It's 0.387 AU. AU, by the way, is the average distance between the Earth and the sun. So Mercury, in the case, is about a third of those, and Mercury loves 3s, right? But let's see, in this moment, he's 0.3692 current, and the average is 0.3871, so super close to average. And so, okay, so what does all that mean? We're just looking at a bunch of numbers and I'm just babbling over here. That's how I roll. What I just found is that when Mercury's at an average distance from the sun during a retrograde period, meaning Mercury passing Earth by, then the Cazimi conditions, at least according to the Hellenistic tradition, which means Mercury within 1 degree of the sun, are going to be alive for 24 hours time. And that would then apply to both Mercury in Pisces and Mercury in Virgo, because those would be places where Mercury's distance to the sun is like average. Well, that's a trip. There are times when Mercury's within 1 degree cazimi condition is almost like 3 days long, centered around, of course, the exact Mercury-Sun conjunction. So what a trip. Didn't mean to go there today. As you can see, I'm just discovering that. I need to go check out that other piece of what I just said. If I feel like this would also happen when Mercury's cazimi in Virgo. And you know what? We're all here for the ride. So come join me to check that out. And then I'll get back to current time into this backstroke through the Pisces seas. But let's, as we're doing this, we're going to watch Mercury's meta retrograde through the elements. So we have a Pisces retrograde, Mercury Sun conjunction, followed by one in Cancer in July of 2026, Scorpio again in November of 2026, and then the meta retrograde right back to this other element of Aquarius. Now, so air, but I think what you're going to find in this case is there's one more water to follow. All right, anyway, then a full commitment to the air. So here's Libra in October 27, Aquarius in February of 2028, Gemini in June of 2028, Libra in October of 2028, and now back to the Earth signs. Okay, so that's January of 2029 in Capricorn, May of 2029 in Taurus, and then we'll get to Virgo here, September 15th, 2029. And I want to see if I rewind 12 hours and then move forward 12 hours after this exact retrograde Mercury Sun conjunction at home in Virgo on September 15th, 2029. Let's see if Mercury is indeed 1 degree from the sun on the other side. So 12 hours before, exactly 1 degree away. 12 hours after, oh my gosh, the same. Now that's wild stuff. Okay, so I get to go play with that another time. Let's get back to right now. I just said Mercury at home in Virgo. Why would we say that? And check out if we go to the medieval scorecard, and sometimes I'm very hesitant to do so, right? We'll see that when Mercury's in Virgo, Mercury has like a really high score on the scorecard, even more so in this case because he's also in his own face or decan or 10 degree division. Traditionally, the last 10 degrees of Virgo related to the 10 of Pentacles tarot card has long been associated with the planet Mercury. So Mercury in his own face, as we say, gets an extra dignity, but he does in Virgo anyway, because Virgo is said to be Mercury's home, right? And the fun thing there, so this is Mercury is the ruler of Virgo. I prefer to say landlord, which is the older term anyway, domicile lord. Mercury is the only planet who's schizophrenic enough to be an honored guest in her own house, right? Honored guest is a term that we use for exaltation. And so I just love this idea of Mercury like having a good conversation with himself, like really welcoming me, say, hey, I'm so glad you're joining me here. It's like, wait, I am you, right? So Mercury, thrice great, schizo enough to be an honored guest in his own house, right? And this is why Mercury, unlike the other planets, can get ridiculously dignified, to use the old terms. And it's fun to see in this moment. I've stopped at Saturn's hour of Saturn's day locally as I'm speaking about these old ancient traditions and rules, right? So Mercury gets a particularly strong dignity in Virgo, unlike any other planet could, because he's both in the sign of his rulership, his own domicile. He's the owner of that house, and he's said to be an honored guest there, right? Well, why am I sharing that now? Because when we push the now button, or let's go to the coming March 7th Mercury cazimi, then the opposite is true, where Mercury is said to both be in detriment, which is the most detrimental term ever in astrology. I hesitate to use it, and also in fall. In this case, speaking of terms, Mercury is in his own terms or in his own bounds, which is a cool thing to see about this particular coming cazimi. Why? Because, and let me show the Egyptian bounds or terms here so we can see that truth. Mercury Sun conjunct in Mercury's tiny slice of Pisces in his own bounds. Well, the ancients would say this means that while Mercury might not be in his own world, or he's not in a place where he is an honored guest, maybe anything, but he does have a skill that will translate. I want to just point out, and we'll get back to this, look how at that time as well of Mercury's cazimi, it's not exact yet, but Mercury is, generally speaking, trine with Jupiter, who of course is traditionally said to be the landlord of Pisces. And this is another thing I hadn't yet seen, so thank you for the opportunity to tune in, and I'm glad to see this before our Mercury Retrograde Challenge starts tomorrow, because it's something I'll look forward to bringing in then. I hadn't yet seen that at the time of the Mercury cazimi, Mercury's in his own bounds, and Jupiter's in Mercury's bounds in Cancer. All right. Well, as long as we are here, let's go just one day further, because the moon moves on average like 13 degrees per day, 13 1/3. She'll be quite slow when she's near Lilith, maybe more like 12 degrees per day. But what's 3 plus 12? And the answer is 15. So I'm just going to push some magic buttons here to ask the computer to fast forward me slowly to Moon trine Jupiter. And we'll see that shortly after the Scorpio moon trines Cancer Jupiter, just after Mercury's Sun conjunction on March 7th, so here's March 8th, then Mercury will translate the light of that trine. Sorry, the moon will translate the Jupiter Cancer trine to Pisces Mercury. So moon trine Mercury, also March 8th. Okay, so what? So what does it mean? We'll check out this gigantor Pisces, grand water trine of Pisces Mercury Sun, Cancer Jupiter, in a Scorpio moon. Of course, the moon's not going to be in the waters for long. She changes signs about every 2.5 days. Mars in Pisces then too. And let me just show you where Mercury will station direct on March 20th. So just as the sun has left Pisces for equinox time, sun is aligning with Neptune, we get Mercury stationing direct right at the north node, right? Which is where Venus was at the time of the recent Aquarius solar eclipse. And to speak English, there's a lot of water in the house right now. And, you know, why would Mercury be both an honored guest and at home in the sign of Virgo? Because Mercury tends towards the details, crossing the T's, dotting the I. I, for me, Virgo, my favorite word is the sacred. But what does that mean? And the Virgo Pisces pole is a really interesting way to explore that question. Just as hot and cold are two sides of a thing called temperature, Virgo and Pisces are two sides of a thing called, you know, there's many answers to that interesting question that I left unfinished. One would be spirit. We're to use the Gurdjieffian speak. Pisces is like, I am but a single cell of the grand uni being. In fact, maybe I am it, you are me, something about a walrus or whatever. Water is life. I just drank some Pythagoras pee. Unfortunately, there was a little Genghis Khan in there. One of my own shedding hairs. But, you know, because the water has been everything, done everything, and holds the memory of all, right? And it's the most mystical thing. I used to think it was so egoic to believe that we won't find life on other planets that don't have water. And now I wonder, and there's something about that in the sacred geometry for astrologer teachings too, for the water is said to be the inverse of the ether, the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. But anyway, you know, on that Virgo side, spirit is in every cell of me, right? Or in every cell of this soil, or in this body as I do my work, or in this flute as I do my practice. But if I do that enough, it's just going to send me into the Pisces poetry anyway. Do you feel that pull, right? So, unfortunately, sometimes when we set out to chop wood and carry water so we can get closer on our spiritual path, we might forget why we started because we've just lost ourselves in all the chopping and carrying, right? So this is one of the challenges of the mutable signs and this opposition in general, right? But if Mercury is more inclined to the practice, to the details, to the dotting the T's and crossing the I's, to seeing perhaps when things are out of aligned, and that's where we can get into some of the potential criticism that can be a Virgo challenging gift. The Pisces side is falling into the mysteries. We're going to have to lose our mind and just go into the fog where you're not going to see with your eyes open. So close them and use the force, like that's more of the Piscean scene and traditionally associated with Jupiter, right? In the modern times, and we can feel why with Neptune. I'm more of an old school kind of character when it comes to some of these astro rules, so I know Pisces is Jupiter's home, and it is really cool to know that at the time of the Cazimi, Mercury will be in his own terms, and Jupiter will be in Mercury's terms or bounds in Cancer. I'm intrigued by that. There's another thing here. So let's bring a little Jupiter on this screen for this next bit. I'm very interested in Mercury's loops and seeing what Mercury does thrice. And I mean by aspects, right? So if we look before Mercury's retrograde, Mercury trined Jupiter on February 16th. Look at this is the Aquarius eclipse day. Venus is at the node. Here's Mercury in Pisces, right? And at that time, Mercury first trines Jupiter, right? So when Mercury does his loops, and I'm trying not to use that word for Mercury's retrograde things because sometimes instead of like a loop during a retrograde, Mercury will do like a Z. But loop very much works for this particular dance, and it usually does. So this is the Mercury loop that's happening now. Here's Mercury on March 5th. Here is March 7th at the Cazimi. Between the water bearer and the fishes. The Babylonians called this great square of Pegasus the flood. But I want to rewind time here, and hopefully this is all on your screen. And let's like zoom in on Mercury. You can see the dates down here, by the way. So we are going to rewind time. Here's like January 29th. Looks like a Mercury-Venus conjunction. And then we'll move through the retrograde period. So here's February 25th, 2026, Mercury station retrograde. See, and now he's going to start going back. Check out how that happens right at the pentacle of this fish's head. So that's a huge thing I'm looking forward to focusing on and tuning into with folks in our Mercury retrograde challenge tomorrow, especially knowing one of the fish shoots away from the ecliptic and one travels along with it, but backwards through the zodiacal order or facing that retrograde direction. So I'm really intrigued by this. Mercury getting far enough north of the sun's path in this particular loop to almost get into the mouth of one of these heavenly fish. All right, let's continue forward. So here's the Cazimi. And then let's go forward from there and we'll get to Mercury station retrograde. See how that just happened? Or direct. All right. And then let's just continue on. So in this case, we can very much use that term loop for Mercury's dance. Astrologers too often show this like linearly, right? Or in the zodiac wheel, we can only show this as something that goes, you know, on the sun's path, on the circle of spirit, on the curve, right? It's healthy to see these powerful shapes that are made. And each of the shapes tells a different story. And I'm amazed here again, like he gets almost into the mouth of a heavenly fish, and then through the water bearer's stream, right, where he goes 3 times, you know, kind of like high and low, or to speak more globally, north and south, after crossing at one of his nodes right in the water stream itself. Amazing. And then Mercury, let's continue on, having passed through the tail of the sea goat before water bearer, fish, water bearer again, then through the tail of the sea monster. All right, I got to continue on because we're going to see him also go through the tie of the fishes, right? I mean, it's intriguing to see sea goat, water bearer, the flood. The Babylonians knew what we saw, see the fishes at one point as a fish and a dove, but then before then as the rivers like the Tigris and the Euphrates. So much watery space, and it's just good evidence. And hopefully that's all been on your screen. I would love to see somebody say, hey, I saw all that in the constellations, if you would, please, in our comments. I'd appreciate it. But anyway, you know, we look back at the Babylonian times and we talk about this as like, well, it's a sidereal astrology. It's like a star-based astrology. And yeah, but when you talk about like the sea goat and the water bearer and the flood and the rivers, why so much water? Because of tropical, because of course in the northern hemisphere, in those climes of Babylon in those days and age, the sun would travel through those constellations during the wet season, right? Anyway, we see Mercury in Pisces. It's a reminder for us to get out of the kind of brain mind. It's like the ultimate opportunity of Mercury retrograde. So one of you who is here live was born with Mercury in Pisces, right? That's just an opportunity to get into the poetic mind, into the vision, to the strength of our intuition, to close our eyes and use our higher senses, open the third eye. You know, Luke complains to Ben about with the blast shield down. He's like, use the force. But he said the force, not the force, you know, like do that, right? And so this is an opportunity for us all at this time where Pisces, of course, the seas that connect us all, it can be quite heavy. We know that compassion is a part of that essence. You know, I also like to see Pisces in the rains, you know, this permanent cycle of evaporation and condensation, right? That it connects the rains or the waters of the earth with the waters of heaven, right? Which is this amazing, beautiful, highly spiritual truth of the interconnectedness of all that is. But also rains can be quite depressing, and Pisces can be that way sometimes, right? It's another commitment I'm making in the Mercury challenges. None of that like e-files and the other things that are coming out, right? Like, and not anything that's going to get me into like Donnie Darko or Scorpio Joe, as I like to call the other side of Gemini Brett side. Like I want to focus on dreams and visions, and that doesn't mean I'm going to completely ignore the nightmares because they have teachings too. But I don't need to promote that by falling asleep, for example, to the type of podcast that I did last night, which is ill-advised for anybody ever. All right. Selena, thank you for saying that you saw the constellations on the screen, and also for saying this, you know, Jupiter's abundant waters. Yeah, I mean, particularly with Jupiter in Cancer. So I think it's very important for us to honor the waterway at this time. And, you know, sometimes in Mercury's loops, like let me rewind to the ones that most recently were around in October. Should have a image of Mercury there instead of Jupiter, but he was in the scene then too. So let's go Mercury conjunct Sun, and we'll rewind to Mercury's retrograde between Earth and Sun in the sign of Scorpio. Here at Scorpio new moon time, November 20th, 25th, right? Well, in these late degrees, Mercury made 3 trines with Saturn, during this. Wasn't a loop at that time. He did kind of a backward Z thing. Made 3 trines with Jupiter. Made 3 oppositions with Uranus. Made 3 trines with Saturn and Neptune. All right. Mercury, he danced with Venus in some interesting ways, but as I like to say, I'm very interested in what Mercury does thrice. And while I'm open to Mercury making connections on either side of sign cusps or whatever, at this time, Mercury from Scorpio did make 3 oppositions with Uranus in Taurus, 3 trines with Jupiter in Cancer, 3 trines with both Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. And when Mercury does his thing, pi times a year, I'm most interested in what Mercury does thrice. All right. There were 3 sextiles with Pluto, and I could go on and on. But anyway, in this one to come, let me just hit now. And again, Mercury trine Jupiter. The first of 3 was on February 16th, 2026. Now look at Mercury. Like Mercury's retrograde is here at 23rd degree of Pisces. All right, and he stations with Venus, which is amazing. But what are the other aspects Mercury's making thrice? He doesn't quite get to Uranus to perfect a sextile. He hits the brakes and turns it around before crossing into Aries and therefore connecting with Neptune and Saturn, at least, perfecting conjunctions. We see Mars in the house, right? But the point here is that Mercury's only going to make one set of 3 aspects to a fellow, and those are 3 trines with Jupiter in Cancer. Even more emphasis on the waterway, the feelings. So sometimes I fear that my attraction for our starry science and getting into all these softwares, and like, first of all, I feel like showing pictures actually helps us take this thing out of the mind alone and helps us bring it into the body mind, the senses, seeing a thing. Like I try to get out the last few nights to see Mercury and Venus as evening stars. The Northern Hemisphere, Pisces, Aries are the best signs, really Aries and Taurus, to see evening star planets, just because of the way that Pisces sets in the Northern Hemisphere versus how it sets in the Southern Hemisphere. But anyway, clouds would not allow. But in that clouds, there is wetness. And I was at the water being with clouds, and it was okay, right? I wasn't seeing this with my eyeball, but I was experiencing it in a very different way and feeling the wetness. And the rains have come and gone, and they're coming back where I live in Berkeley, California right now, which feels only quite appropriate to this. The rains can be depressing. And the rains from our own eyes, right? That is the holy water, and sometimes the very catalyst for the greatest growth. So my commitment in the Pisces Mercury time is to send more of my consciousness into my heart mind, to let the waters flow, and to bring an offering to Mercury connected with a wish, and asking Mercury to support me in that great work. So if you want to join our Mercury retrograde journey, and I hope you will, GeminiBrett.com/retrograde will get you to the page where you can learn all about it. If you are in Constellations or astrology schools community, which you can learn about at GeminiBrett.com/constellations, don't forget to use your discount codes. All right, you'll find those in an email I just sent out yesterday, or in the top of the feed at your Constellations community page. Stacy Anderson writes, the software you use helps one orient outside in person if weather permits. It assists in feeling more connected to the universe. Thank you so much for saying that. what is it? Hermeticamage? I'm going to get to learn because I see that you just joined our Mercury Retrograde Challenge. Great. Well, if you can make it live for our first session, I will see you in about, 30 and a half hours. Oh, wait, that's kind of like 33. Mercury likes that stuff. When we will have our first class at 10. Wait, I must be doing that math wrong. I totally am. I should be doing 12 plus 6.5, so 18.5 hours at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, Tuesday, February 24th. We would have them on Wednesdays on Mercury's days, but we don't have help with baby Maya, who of course was named for the mother of Hermes, on Wednesdays. So Tuesdays, which will help people get aligned and have their Wednesdays with Mercury rather than us. You'll find if you just signed up that you will have access to the course page where all the recordings will be posted. We also have a WhatsApp group where we'll be sharing and supporting one another along the way. And it's going to be a wonderful community container offering safe space for us to experience and express the tenderness of the heart mind. But that doesn't mean I'm not going to be in charts and all the softwares and use a lot of words. Anyway, hope to see you there, friends. Mercury's coming close to Earth, maybe even that proximity. There's like extra exchange and things are meant to get a little wonky. Great, cool. Let's have it. Let's do it. Let's not get played by Mercury retrograde by playing along. Thanks for spending some time here with me, friends. The present of your presence is the greatest gift. And maybe I'll get to see you in one of these many places, like at the Sacred Geometry class, GeminiBrett.com/sacred, in the Mercury Retrograde Challenge, GeminiBrett.com/retrograde, or in Constellations. So GeminiBrett.com/constellations. You can just click the Constellations community tab at GeminiBrett.com, where you could also sign up for my mailing list or buy me a cup of tea or sign up for a session so we can tune into these wonders as they are working with the seas of your own beautiful nativity. All right, friends. See you in space.